My sister was the favorite for 29 years and humiliated me my whole life. But when I discovered she was cheating on her husband, I waited, gathered evidence, and exposed everything in front of my parents. Now she lost her marriage, her job, and even scammed those who always defended her. I'm 29 years old. I work in it, consulting. And I need to tell this story because what happened basically destroyed my family. And even though part of me feels like I should regret it, the truth is, I don't. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was a kid and my sister Victoria was already the family star. I don't remember a single day of my childhood where I didn't feel like the second course. You know, like those leftovers you save in the fridge and never eat. Victoria was 3 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, everything revolved around her. When she got good grades, it was because she was brilliant. When I got good grades, it was because the teacher was easy. When she wanted something, my parents would move heaven and earth to get it for her. When I asked for something, they told me to learn to be more responsible and earn it myself. My mom always said Victoria was special, that she had something unique. And I'd just stand there thinking, like, and what am I? Heir? The thing is, I grew up used to that, like it was my normal, even though it hurt like hell every time it happened. I remember once when I was about 12, Victoria was 15. She wanted a new iPhone, and my parents bought it for her without batting an eye. I had been saving my money from mowing lawns to buy myself a video game console. I had almost all the money, and when I asked them to lend me the last $50 because I was short, my dad said no, that this was teaching me the value of money. Can you believe it? But 2 weeks earlier, they'd spent like $800 on Victoria's phone without thinking twice. That kind of thing happened constantly. When she went to her activities, my parents would cancel whatever to take her and support her. But when I had an important soccer game, they almost always had some excuse not to go. Years went by, and the dynamic never changed. If anything, it got worse. Victoria went to college. Obviously, my parents paid for everything. And when my turn came, they told me they could help with something, but that I should consider student loans because they didn't want to overextend themselves financially. Literally 3 years earlier, they had paid for Victoria's entire 4 years of college without blinking. But for me, suddenly, they had to be cautious with money. Anyway, I got a part-time job, took out some loans, and managed. It was tough, but it also made me independent, I guess. Meanwhile, Victoria kept being the golden child. She graduated with honors in marketing, got a well-paid job at an advertising firm, and my parents wouldn't stop bragging about her to everyone. When I graduated 2 years later with my degree in computer science, my mom gave me a quick hug and said, "Congratulations, honey," and then spent half an hour on the phone with her sister talking about how Victoria had just gotten a promotion. I just stood there in the living room with my diploma thinking, well, at least I'm proud of myself. When I was 24, I met Rachel in a hiking group. She was a yoga instructor and had this calm and positive energy that made me feel like, for the first time, someone really saw me. You know what I mean? It wasn't like my family, where I constantly had to fight for crumbs of attention. With Rachel, things just flowed naturally. We started dating, and like 6 months later, we moved in together to a small but cozy apartment. She met my family several times and was always polite, but afterwards she'd tell me privately, "Your family is weird. Like everything is about your sister, and you just exist there in the background." And she was right, but it was so obvious to someone from the outside that it embarrassed me. Meanwhile, Victoria had met Jacob, this super responsible guy who worked in finance. A bit serious, but a good guy overall. They got married when she was 27 and I was 24. And obviously it was this huge, perfect wedding that my parents practically financed completely. I remember being at that reception watching my parents cry tears of happiness while dancing with Victoria, and I was thinking, when I get married, they probably won't even offer to help with anything. Things continued like that for a couple years. Victoria and Jacob seemed happy, or that's what we all thought. She kept working at the same advertising company, had been promoted to account manager, and was always super busy with projects and business trips. Jacob worked long hours too, so I guess it worked for them? I don't know. By then I was 26 and working in consulting. I traveled quite a bit for work too. And Rachel and I were doing well. We talked about getting married soon, but weren't in a hurry. One day, I think it was like in May or June, 3 years ago, I went to visit my parents for a family dinner. Victoria arrived late, as always, and left her phone on the couch while she went to the bathroom. And the phone started vibrating like crazy with messages, and I wasn't going to look, but the screen lit up, and I caught part of a message that said something like, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Your husband is going to be away all day, right?" And there was a kiss emoji. I froze. I mean, it could be innocent, right? But something in my stomach told me it wasn't. When Victoria came back, she grabbed her phone quickly and I stayed quiet. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Nothing concrete, but like signs, you know? Victoria would cancel family plans last minute, always had excuses about work, and once I saw her at a cafe with a guy who definitely wasn't Jacob when she was supposed to be in a work meeting. I was there by chance, had gone to meet a client, and I saw them together laughing, and he was touching her hand in a way that wasn't professional at all. They didn't see me, and I left quickly because I didn't want to confront anything in that moment. But I already knew. The confirmation came like 2 months later, when I went to Victoria and Jacob's house to drop off some documents he had asked for, something tax-related that needed my signature. Jacob wasn't there. He'd gone on a business trip to Chicago for 3 days. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered, and since I had a copy of the emergency key that Jacob had given me months before, I went in and left the papers on the kitchen table. I was about to leave when I heard noises upstairs, like voices and movement. I froze, thinking maybe it was burglars or something, and I went up the stairs without making noise. The master bedroom door was ajar and, well, I won't give graphic details, but there was Victoria with a guy I later learned was named Noah, a coworker of hers. I went down the stairs in complete shock, felt like I was going to throw up, and got out of there as fast as I could. I drove around for like an hour without a destination, not knowing what to do with that information. Did I tell Jacob? Did I confront Victoria? Did I stay quiet? Rachel found me at the apartment like 3 hours later, sitting on the couch staring at the wall, and I told her everything. She told me, "You have to tell Jacob. He deserves to know." And I knew she was right, but I also knew that was going to blow everything up. I decided to wait and gather evidence because I knew that if I went with the story without proof, Victoria would deny everything, and my parents would crucify me for accusing their precious daughter. For the next 2 weeks, I was like a private detective, basically. I followed Victoria a couple times when she left work and saw her meet with Noah at different places. I took discreet photos of them kissing in a hotel parking lot, going into an apartment together that I later learned was his. I felt horrible doing it, like I'd never been that kind of person, but I also felt it was necessary. The moment of truth came at a family barbecue at my parents' house. It was July and hot as hell. Victoria arrived alone because Jacob was working that weekend, and Noah, because apparently my sister had no boundaries, also showed up. She introduced him as her new coworker who had just moved to the city and didn't know anyone, and my parents, being the perfect hosts, welcomed him with open arms. Rachel was with me and squeezed my hand so hard she almost cut off my circulation when she saw Noah. Things got worse when Noah started drinking beers and got kind of touchy with Rachel, making inappropriate comments about how her outfit looked, saying things like, "Your boyfriend is a lucky guy," while winking at me. Rachel looked super uncomfortable, and I was about to explode. But I held back because I knew that if I made a scene right there without the proper evidence, they were going to make me look like the jealous, crazy one. Victoria saw all this and did nothing. In fact, she even laughed at some of Noah's comments. That was the moment I decided enough was enough, that I wasn't going to protect her anymore. And that same night, I texted Jacob and told him we needed to talk, urgently, about something important. He told me he was getting back from his trip on Monday, and we could meet. Monday, we met at a Starbucks near his office, and I brought my laptop with all the photos and had even taken screenshots of messages between Victoria and Noah that I'd managed to see when she left her phone unlocked at family gatherings. I showed everything to Jacob and, it was devastating to watch him process the information. First, he didn't believe me. Said there must be some explanation. But as he saw photo after photo and read message after message, his face got paler and paler. In the end, he just closed my laptop and said, "Thanks for telling me," and left. I sat there feeling horrible but also relieved that it was out. I didn't know that was just the beginning of the real drama. Jacob confronted Victoria that same night, and she obviously denied everything at first. But when he mentioned the evidence I had shown him, she changed strategy and admitted, yes, but that it was my fault for spying on her and violating her privacy. She literally tried to make herself the victim. Jacob asked for a divorce immediately and left the house to stay with a friend. Victoria was furious, called my parents crying, and they in turn called me yelling about how I dared to destroy my sister's marriage, that I was a meddler and a bad brother. My mom literally told me she'd always known I was jealous of Victoria and that this was my twisted way of hurting her. I tried to explain to them that Victoria had cheated on Jacob, that he deserved to know the truth, but they didn't want to hear anything. My dad told me I had 1 week to come home, apologize to Victoria and Jacob, and beg for their forgiveness, or else they would consider me out of the family. I told them that not in a million years would I apologize for doing the right thing, and my dad said, then don't call here again, and hung up. Rachel was incredible through all that. She supported me completely and told me that if my family couldn't see that I'd done the right thing, then they didn't deserve to have me in their lives. But it still hurt. I mean, as toxic as the family dynamic was, they were still my family, and being cut off like that felt like a punch in the stomach. Victoria told them her version of the story, obviously, where I was the villain obsessed with ruining her life, and my parents believed her without questioning anything. Jacob, for his part, started the divorce process, and from what a mutual friend told me, Victoria tried to squeeze every last penny out of him in the settlement. But Jacob had good lawyers, and in the end, she didn't get much because there was clear evidence of infidelity. Victoria kept working at the same company, but Noah apparently was transferred to another office or quit, I'm not sure. The details came to me second-hand or third-hand, because obviously I wasn't talking to anyone in my family anymore. I decided I needed a complete change of scenery. So when I was offered a position at another company that required moving to another state, like 1,000 miles away, I took it without thinking twice. Rachel also found work there, teaching yoga at a studio, and was excited about the change. We moved like 3 months after the whole family explosion, and honestly, it was liberating. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel that constant pressure of never being good enough, of always being in Victoria's shadow. We started from scratch, made new friends, and like a year after living there, I proposed to Rachel on a hike through the mountains. She said yes, obviously, and we got married in a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends. I didn't invite my family, and they didn't even know I'd gotten married. It was bittersweet. Honestly, part of me wished things were different, but most of me was at peace with my decision. Like 3 years went by. Rachel and I were doing great. I'd been promoted at work and she'd opened her own yoga studio. We had a nice, quiet life. There were days where I thought about my family, wondered how they were, but I never felt like reaching out because I knew nothing had changed. One day, I think it was like 4 months ago, I was driving home and stopped at a McDonald's because I was hungry and hadn't eaten anything all day. I pulled up to the drive-thru, ordered my food, and when I got to the window to pay, I almost had a heart attack. There was Victoria in a McDonald's uniform taking my order. She looked very different, like she had shorter hair and looked tired. Had lost weight too. Not the healthy kind, but the kind that indicates you're not eating well. We looked at each other, and for a second, neither of us said anything, until she murmured my name like a question. Lucas? I nodded, and she just stood there not knowing what to do. The guy behind me started honking impatiently, so I paid quickly, grabbed my food, and left without saying anything else. That night I couldn't sleep, thinking about Victoria working at McDonald's. I mean, she'd been an account manager at an important advertising firm. What the hell had happened? Rachel told me maybe I should try to contact her and find out, but I wasn't sure I wanted to open that door after 3 years of peace. A week later, I got a message on Facebook from Victoria asking me to meet for coffee. I hesitated a lot, but curiosity won, and I accepted. We met at a neutral cafe the following Saturday, and when I arrived, she was already sitting at a table in the back. She got up when she saw me, and there was this super awkward moment where we didn't know whether to hug or just sit down. In the end, we just sat down. Victoria started talking and basically told me her life had gone to hell after the divorce. She lost her job because apparently the relationship with Noah had caused problems in the office beyond what I knew. There were complaints from other employees about favoritism and toxic work environment. After they fired her, it was hard to find another job in the same field because the references were bad, so she'd been jumping from job to job in increasingly worse positions until ending up at McDonald's. She told me Noah had turned out to be a controlling and manipulative guy, that he'd isolated her from friends, and when she finally tried to leave him, he got aggressive, not physically but emotionally, and she had to move cities to get away from him. That's why she'd ended up in the same state where I lived. Pure coincidence, apparently. She was living in a small apartment with 2 roommates, could barely pay her part of the rent, and was basically surviving day to day. She asked me for help, not specifically money. Well, yeah, she did hint that anything would help, but more than anything, she seemed to be looking for reconnection, like she wanted to rebuild something of our relationship. I sat there listening to her with super mixed feelings. On one hand, I felt some pity because she was clearly having the hard time. But on the other hand, I remembered everything that had happened, how she'd treated me, how my parents had discarded me for standing up for myself. I asked her how our parents were, and she got weird. Avoided the question at first, but when I insisted, she told me things between her and them were also complicated. She didn't give me specific details, just said they'd had strong disagreements and that they didn't talk much anymore. We ended that meeting without really resolving anything. I told her I needed time to process everything, and she understood, or at least said she did. That night I talked at length with Rachel about everything, and she told me to do what felt right but not to feel obligated to help Victoria just because she was family. I decided to investigate a bit more before doing anything, so I contacted a second cousin who still lived in my hometown and asked him if he knew anything about my parents. What he told me left me in shock. Apparently Victoria had convinced my parents to sign the deed of their house over to her name like a year and a half ago, using some excuse about estate planning or asset protection. I'm not exactly sure. The thing is that once the house was in her name, Victoria sold it without telling them, along with Noah, who apparently came back into her life briefly during that time, and they kept the money. My parents were left without a house, and with very little savings, because they'd spent so much on Victoria's lifestyle over the years. Now they were living in an old, run-down apartment, surviving on their pension, which wasn't much. I couldn't believe it. I literally stood there with my mouth open when my cousin told me all that. Victoria hadn't just cheated on her husband, ruined her marriage, but had also scammed our parents, the same people who had sacrificed everything for her their entire lives. It was so twisted it almost seemed unreal. I contacted Victoria again and asked her to meet me again. This time I went straight to the point and asked her about our parents' house. Her face changed immediately, went from that pleading, needy expression to something more defensive and cold. She tried to justify herself, saying our parents had given her the house voluntarily, that she hadn't forced them to do anything, and that what she did with the property afterwards was her decision. I told her that was basically stealing their security and their future, and she exploded. She yelled at me that I didn't understand anything, that our parents had always put impossible expectations on her, that everything she'd done wrong in her life was because of the pressure they put on her to be perfect. She said, I'd been lucky to be ignored because that way I didn't carry that pressure, and that she deserved that house after everything she'd put up with. It was clear there was zero remorse, zero accountability. Everything was someone else's fault in her mind. I told her I wasn't going to help her financially, but that I'd give her information about shelters for women in domestic abuse situations since she'd mentioned Noah, and about free legal resources if she needed help with that. She got angry, saying that wasn't what she needed, that she needed money and real family support. I told her she'd destroyed any concept of family when she decided to scam our parents, and that the consequences of her actions weren't my problem. She left the cafe, furious, yelling at me that I'd always been a shitty brother and that she knew I just wanted to see her suffer because I'd always been jealous of her. The same words my mom had said to me 3 years earlier. I left there feeling emotionally drained, but also more certain than ever that I'd done the right thing all along. But the thing about my parents ate at me, despite everything that had happened. Thinking about them living in precarious conditions because their favorite daughter had betrayed them generated complicated feelings in me. Rachel told me, if I She wanted to contact them. It was my decision, and she'd support me, but not to feel obligated just out of guilt. I decided to write them a letter. Yes, a physical letter, because I didn't have their new numbers and didn't know if the old ones still worked. I told them I'd seen Victoria, that I'd found out what happened with the house, and that if they wanted to talk, I was willing to listen to them, but with clear boundaries. I put the address of a P.O. a box I opened specifically for this, because I didn't want to give them my real address. Yet, I sent the letter and honestly didn't expect a response. I thought they probably still hated me and blamed me for everything with Victoria and Jacob, but like 3 weeks later I got a reply letter from my mom. It was long, like 5 pages handwritten with shaky handwriting, and it was basically a giant apology. She acknowledged they'd been unfair to me my whole life, that they'd put Victoria on a pedestal without considering how that affected me, that they'd been blind to her flaws and defects, and that when I exposed her infidelity, they'd reacted badly out of denial. She admitted Victoria had manipulated them into giving her the house, that they hadn't wanted to see the warning signs, and that now they were paying the price for having raised someone who only thought about herself. She said they didn't expect my forgiveness, but wanted the opportunity to talk to me in person if I was willing. She included a new phone number and asked me to contact them when I was ready. I'm not going to lie, I cried, reading that letter. I don't know if it was relief or sadness or a mix of everything, but it was the first time my parents really acknowledged how they'd treated me, and that meant something, even if it came so late. I talked with Rachel, and we decided I'd invite them to come visit us, but wouldn't pay for the trip. I wanted to see if they were willing to make the effort. They accepted, and like a month later, we picked them up at the airport. It was super weird seeing them. After more than 3 years, they looked much older and more tired. My dad had lost hair and my mom had a lot more gray. We went to dinner at a quiet restaurant and talked for hours. They apologized to me multiple times, told me more details about how Victoria had convinced them to sign over the house, how they'd felt when they discovered she'd sold it, and how they'd tried to contact her but she blocked them and disappeared. They asked about my life. About Rachel, who they properly met for the first time that night, since when we'd met before I was just her boyfriend. And they seemed genuinely interested. It wasn't a magical instant healing or anything like that. There was a lot of accumulated pain from years. But it was a start. I offered to help them with some money so they could move to a better apartment. Nothing extravagant, but something decent and safe. My dad at first didn't want to accept it out of pride, but my mom convinced him, saying they'd already lost enough because of their stubbornness. I ended up helping them find a 2-bedroom place in a clean complex in their city, paid the deposit and the first 3 months of rent so they could get established, but I made it clear that from there on they had to manage with their pension. I also told them Victoria was out of my life permanently, and that if they decided to have contact with her again, I respected their decision, but that would mean very strict boundaries in our relationship. They said they understood, and that honestly they had no interest in talking to Victoria again after what she did, but that if someday she genuinely changed and asked for help, they'd have to decide in that moment. That was like 2 months ago. Now, I talk to my parents like once a week on the phone, nothing intense but normal conversations about the weather and how things are going. They came to visit us again last month, and it was less tense than the first time. Rachel says it's okay to... I have a cautious relationship with them as long as we keep setting clear boundaries, and I agree. I'm not going to pretend everything is forgiven and forgotten. There are decades of damage that don't get erased with some apologies. But it's something, I guess. Victoria tried to contact me one more time after our last encounter, sending me a long message on Facebook about how I was a hypocrite for helping our parents, but not her, and how she was the real victim in all this. I read it, didn't respond, and blocked her on all platforms. I don't have the energy or interest in her ongoing drama and her inability to take responsibility for her actions. Last week, my mom sent me a text asking if Rachel and I were going to have kids soon, and I laughed because it was so normal and ordinary that it felt weird after everything that happened. I told her maybe, in a couple years, that we wanted to enjoy being married and stable first. She responded with a heart emoji and said, when that time comes, she'll be there to support us in whatever way she can. I don't know if things with my parents are going to be completely good someday. Like there'll probably always be that scar from the years of emotional neglect and favoritism. But for now, this is enough. And Victoria, well, she made her bed, and now she has to lie in it. It sounds harsh to say it like that, but it's the truth. Sometimes I think about what it would have been like to grow up in a family where both children were valued equally, where I didn't have to compete for love and attention that should have been unconditional from the beginning. But that's fantasizing about something that never existed. What does exist is my life now, with Rachel, with my job that I like, with friends who appreciate me for who I am, and with a careful but existing relationship with my parents. It's enough. It has to be.